Okay, take two. I tried to do this as a live, but yeah, connection's not so good in my workshop. So picked up this Bernina earlier today. It's yeah, a little bit tatty. The lady says that the light comes on, but it doesn't run. I picked it up for a good price, so hopefully we can get it up and running and back to a new home. I've got a couple of 801s actually sat down here waiting for a new home, along with numerous other Bernina sewing machines. So I don't normally pay any money for these, but I did give her some money for this because it did have all the accessory boxes and bits and bobs. She gave me a quick cut of photos, but so look, not a single bobbin is correct for the machine, but never mind. We've got various feet, and you know, they're all in hardly used, which is nice. Got some very old, don't reckon that oil was ever opened or used either. So yeah, we've got the accessory box, we've got the usual type 289 foot control. No doubt the capacitor's gone in that. What else we've got to do? We've got a non-compliant plug, so we'll change that plug over as usual, so the machine can go to whoever buys it with a fresh pat test. It's an 801 Sport. Let's have a look at this extension table. I haven't looked at any of this, so this is the first reveal. So yeah, that's lovely. Not a mark on it. Yeah, even that's rubbed off. So yeah, pristine 801 actually. Oh, there's a few fluff bunnies in there, but yeah, we'll get it serviced and hopefully up and running, and it'll make a lovely machine for somebody. Okay, so let's start with plugging this machine in and seeing what it actually does. Like I say, the lady said the light came on, and that's all I know really. I know nothing else about the machine. I've checked everything turns freely, which it does. So let's have a look. Okay, so we have light, but nothing from the foot control. So the next thing I will do is foot control repair. That's most likely going to be my first port of call. Let's have a look, see if I can find my trusty favourite screwdriver. So in we go to the foot control. I find it better if, when you're doing this, if you attempt to do this, and you do opposite screws on the diagonals, it just means that nothing's going to fly off at you. In fact, it might not be the capacitors, although we're going to change them. It could be the carbon tracer pins not making a contact, which would then also mean that the foot control wouldn't operate. So I've got all those little bits out of the foot control there. Let me just get a little pot for this job. That little cardboard box will do. I've got my 4 screws, my 4 little clips. Take the foot control apart, like so. No, we've got carbon tracer pins, so they're not broken. Now that screwdriver, I know from experience, isn't very good for these screws. They take a bit more torque. So 1. Two. That's 3. Okay, so that capacitor's got a crack in it, so we already know that's not good. So what I'm going to do, let's just quickly plug in the soldering iron. Get a bit of heat going in there. So you need to take this foot control apart. Incidentally, if this is a problem with your foot control and you're comfortable using a soldering iron and comfortable in your DIY skills, do sell little repair kits for this, or you can send your foot control to us here at Just So, and yeah, you just basically pay the postage and the cost, and we do this repair for you. So as you can see, if you're doing this yourself, don't know how well you can see, these are the little carbon tracer pins. They don't look like they've had much use. There's not a lot of wear on the little tracer on the board, but we're going to change this capacitor. So let me just get the right bit of, move some of these other bits, because I've been building motor capacitors for the last week or so in my spare time, just to ensure that I have a supply. There's a lot of debate online at the moment, especially in all these vintage forums, where sort of the old guard, as I like to call them, say, oh, just take the capacitors out, the machine runs without it, it's just for radio interference. But it's not actually strictly the case. Some of the capacitors, you know, they do add safety to the machines. They are there to stop arcing and sparks on the motor. I don't think that iron's hot enough yet. Let's get in there. Yeah, arcing, sparks, premature brush wear. So, I mean, a lot of people, they're getting their vintage sewing machines because they like the thought of sewing on something vintage and keeping older machines running and, yeah, using older machines. So why wouldn't you replace the capacitors that are just going to give you that extra, you know, year or so use out of a motor? You might as well, just because Fred in Glasgow says to rip it out, the machine's fine without it. Most of the time it's because they don't know how to rebuild the original capacitors. So yeah, I mean, just give you an example whilst I'm babbling on here. This is essentially a capacitor for you know, quite a lot of Berninas. This one doesn't have the resistor built in, but it's a bank of 4 capacitors, your 4 wires. That's essentially what it is. So if you know what you're doing, let me just show you a bit closer to the camera. That is what we're looking at. So if you know what you're doing, then, you know, they should be replaced. And when I get around to getting them on the shop, we do sell them. Some capacitors I make, some I buy from a guy called Theo in Norway, who is a very good sewing machine engineer. He also 3D prints a lot of parts, which I don't have a 3D printer yet, but I like the thought of printing these sewing machine parts, keeping machines running for people. That's what we're all about. So let's do this capacitor swap. Let's get that back through there, and this one. line it up would help. There we go. Just put down that original solder. Should be enough to just hold it in place. That's the first job done. So, my little snips, take the tails off that capacitor. Go in the bin. That's where you have to be careful that you don't break these carbon tracer pins. They are still available from Bernina. In fact, we do sell them in our shop. It's back together now. Now the trickiest bit actually is getting the lid back on this foot control. That's the board held in place where it needs to be, and it's because you have to get this little clip over here, so it's a tricky job. But what we'll do is I'll get this foot control together, and then I'll stop the video just because I'll get it together and try the machine, and then I'll stop the video and restart another recording, because if it works, that's great. I will then be looking at taking a quick look at the motor. I'd imagine it still has the original capacitor, so we'll be changing that motor capacitor over to a new one. It also creates a smoother sewing experience. The machine will be less juddery, especially at slow speeds. So many reasons to keep capacitors in machines. The old ones were a fire risk. They're, you know, a foil capacitor with a liquid that stinks when they fail, and yeah, they could have caught fire. But we're not swapping old stock with old stock. We're using new modern capacitors, so there's no real reason why. Like I said, no real reason not to put it in. So what I'm actually doing here is the little Bernina logo that sits on the top of this foot control. It's held in with these little plastic clips. What I like to do is just pop it off, because it gives me better view when I'm actually putting this foot control back together, because they can be tricky little sods. Incidentally, Theo, who I was mentioning over in Norway, he has loads of free files, STL files for 3D printers for sewing machine parts. So he actually has a file for the plastic casings for these foot controls, the little brackets and everything else. So yeah, really good. So the way not to bugger those pins, I set my old faithful screwdriver underneath here so it doesn't drop down. And I'm sorry, I can't really show you on the camera what I need to do because it's kind of hidden away, but see, even then it's gone a bit wrong. So I'll start that again. And I do quite a lot of these, so it is a fiddly task. Let's get that line up. And the springs aren't aligned. Back up there. That's where it needs to be. Make sure my springs are seated properly. There we go. Right. So again, it's going to be opposite screws. So I'll get the first one in. Now that's in, we know nothing's going anywhere. Second bracket on. Okay, we're now secure. Get the final two screws in. That's one. That's two. Then we just got to pop on the little Bernina logo piece. Line that up. There we go. Right. Let's see if that's fixed our problem. Was it the foot control capacitor? I've got power back to the machine. Oh, and look at that. That's on the minimum. That's on the maximum. Okay, so we know the machine works. The next thing to do, we're going to change this plug. Now, most of you that follow me, I think, are English, but I do know I have people from other countries, and they might not realise quite how superior the British plug is to lots of other countries. How can I explain this? There's loads of YouTube videos about it, and there's also a lot of people in England that are really stupid. They buy like the plug covers for babies and toddlers. Now, a UK socket, unlike an American socket, has little windows here, live and neutral. You can't get your finger in it. You can't physically open that. It's controlled by a switch by the earth, and when the earth's engaged, that opens. Can you see these gates opening? Let me see. See, open, closed. The earth prong is longer on a British plug than the other prongs. So when it engages, these live and neutral don't come in contact with the house supply until there. Okay, now a compliant UK plug now has this extra insulation, so even if the plug's sat like that, you can't touch live and neutral. Okay, that wouldn't be a very well inserted plug, but you can't touch live and neutral because of this extra insulation on the live and neutral prongs. This is the old plug, and as you can see, it doesn't have that. Now has to comply, to be safe, to pass a PAT test. So that's why we'll be swapping this plug. There's nothing physically wrong with it. Chances are it's got a 13 amp fuse in it. We'll be swapping that for a 3. But that's why we change so many plugs. Da, 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 da. 5 amp fuse. We were close. The other thing in the UK plug, the wires aren't done quite right here, but we'll change it. If you were to pull on this plug, obviously you have this sort of keep holding it in place, but if you were to pull on the plug, the live wire is the shortest wire when wiring a plug. So if anything comes undone, the first thing that comes out is the live. Whoever put this plug in has made these the same length. But you should have the live come out, then the neutral, and lastly, if you've got an earth, the earth will detach. So it's always earth bonded. What we want to do here is we're just going to shorten the neutral and then fit the new plug. Strip some of this wire back. So I've got a new plug. Unfortunately, these all come with a 13 amp fuse, of which I have loads of. So take the 13 amp fuse out. Anybody that knows anything about sewing machines, look at that fuse. Look, it's a new plug, but look, the ceramic fuse has just come off there. That's how cheaply these fuses are made. You know, they're made by the millions. It's literally a fuse wire held between in a ceramic sort of casing. That's all it is. So that can go in the bin. Sometimes I keep them for high powered appliances in the house, like your tumble dryer and stuff like that. I'm going to get a decent quality fuse. It's ready to go. Whoops, nearly lost the screw there. First things first, let's do the live. Surprised we're still using sort of screw fittings in plugs. I thought they would have switched more to a Wago style design by now. I know that the back boxes for sockets, there's some now that are Wago style connectors. They're a bit more expensive, but they speed up installation for an electrician. So I'll do some other bits and bobs for people, and yeah, they're becoming a firm favourite. So plug essentially wired. Just pop that fuse in, snapped into place. Incidentally, if you have a non-compliant fuse in your house on an old product, on a sewing machine, something like that, it's not a legal requirement for you to change them. However, it is for me, because I am selling on second-hand sewing machines as a business. Now the new regulations mean that it has to be compliant. Doesn't necessarily have to come with a pat test certificate. That's just something that I always do, and I give to my clients so that they can take their machines to classes, to workshops, etc. But yeah, there we go, brand new plug. Machine lights on. We know we're good. Again, another one for the bin. Okay, so I'm just going to add a video now. I am going to be, in fact, I need to put this camera on charge as I do, but I am going to, this is going to be mute after this, simply because I've got a dryer that needs to run. I need to get some fabric washed, so yeah, I'll have the dryer running, so no sound from now on really. It's going to Okay, I'm just restarting the video from this point with a bit of sound. So this is the old capacitor that everybody seems to get rid of. So this is what would be classed as, what is kind of classed as a 2.1. So it has a resistor here. So we need a capacitor that's got a bleed resistor built in. So we're removing this old capacitor. Oh, excuse me, I have a phone call to answer. Okay, so I forgot what I was saying. So I've just taken the old capacitor out of the foot control. This is, as I was saying, it's got a bleed resistor on this white line here. So yeah, we make these up just to replace greatly improve the actual machine in terms of performance and durability. So I'm just going to pop the motor out of its housing gently. The commutator looks good. And the motor brushes, I can see they've got at least 5mm visible, so plenty of life left in them. So just install the new capacitor. Oops. To check actually I've picked up the right one and not one of the older ones without the bleed resistor in it. Sorry, right, the phone went. So where were we? Yeah, swapping capacitors. So we're just going to put this new capacitor onto the motor. So that's the north wiring. Make sure that motor rubbers or bushings, whatever you want to call them, are seated correctly. Of course we're looking at this that way, so you want the red one into there. Black one into there. Like so. Make sure it's on there. A little bit fiddly, especially with sausage fingers like mine. Finally, fourth wire. It's not quite pushed home. There we go. So we've got our replacement capacitor tucked nicely back in the motor housing. Just make sure we don't pinch any wires. Again, it's quite an essential part of the machine, this plastic casing, because it is keeping those electronics separate from the metal frame of the sewing machine. So obviously it's a class 2 product, which basically means that it is double insulated, it has no earth, so there's multiple layers. Basically it has to have a minimum of 2 layers of protection for the user in case of electric shock, and of course insulation, etc. is one of them. So really, if this case is cracked or damaged, the machine's not that safe. And you do get some gung-ho sewing machine technicians that do tend to break them, crack them. Just not very careful. They're always in such a rush. And you know, these aren't the hardest machines in the world to work on. So that's the motor back in its house. I'm just going to reconnect it to the base of the machine with the 2 black screws and 2 washers. Like so. Move that spare capacitor out of the way. Let's tidy up a little bit because we're getting a little bit messy. Had to just, I've run out of those capacitors, so what I've quickly done is, basically it's the same as the number 2 capacitor, just without the resistor. So I grabbed a number 2 and took it back apart and popped in the resistor. So that's all those bits done. That can go away, that can go with my Bernina capacitor box. And again, what we're going to do now is just check everything's wired up correctly. We don't have any problems. So, machine on. Foot control. Obviously the machine's not running because we've got no clutch, but I think we're good. Right, let's continue. Okay, so I may have had a bit of a disaster. I don't think I pressed record on the last bit of the video where I was actually freeing up the feed dog, drop feed, sorry. That was all seized. Had to quickly take the bottom off the machine and free that up. I don't use heat, I'm not a big fan of that. I'd rather just take the machine apart properly. I'm a little bit confused by this bobbin case actually. I think this is the first sport bobbin case where it's got a hollow shaft, a hole in it, and a funny little nick out the back. That's a new one on me. It's definitely genuine Bernina, 317108.3. So I'm going to quickly look that up on my parts list because I have not seen one with that design before, and I've seen hundreds of these machines. So yeah, a little bit unusual. Someone's used some horrible grease in the top of this at some point. I don't know why that would be.
the Lizzo fam. That's a bomb going Bedford. Go back in the mix shop.